Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Vermont Report on Palestine-Israel. I'm Mark Hage. It is day 646 of Israel's campaign of genocide against the Palestinian people of Gaza. And according to the Gaza Health Ministry, 58,386 Palestinians have been killed, more than 14,000 are missing, and more than 139,000 have been wounded or injured. As yet, there is no end in sight to the carnage. This program will feature an in-depth interview with Dr. Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. In 2024, Ms. Albanese and her team released a seminal and very detailed report that concluded that Israel was indeed guilty of the crime of genocide in Gaza. More recently, her office released a scathing report titled The Economy of Genocide, and it documents the investments and the behavior of scores of companies that, in Ms. Albanese's words, are guilty of sustaining and profiting off of Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Now, the Trump administration has sanctioned Ms. Albanese because of this new report, arguing that she is waging economic and political warfare against the United States and American companies. They did not bother, however, to take issue with the facts of her report, and Ms. Albanese and her team are not backing down. Recently, Ms. Albanese sat down with Mohammed Hassan of the Big Picture podcast to talk about the report, what it tells us about a system of corporate exploitation and profiteering at the expense of an oppressed people, and how this system implicates all of us here in the United States and globally in the immense suffering and oppression of the Palestinian people. Here now is Francesca Albanese on the Big Picture podcast.
We are still part of a system that has waged war for profit, destroying life, creating more insecurity and instability, not just in the Middle East, but for all of us. Member states like the US, Israel, and others who have been plotting to transform this genocide into a lucrative endeavor is that they need to pay reparation. Capitalism and markets that know no rules, that are able to sustain themselves and keep citizens embroiled into criminal activities, even when the crimes are ostentatious, in the name of profits, hidden by the claim of neutrality. Now Palestine is the next defining moment that needs to lead to accountability. If not now, when? And if not us pushing for this change, who?
Just 2 days after I sat down with Francesca Albanese, she was placed under sanctions by the Trump administration. They accuse her of waging economic warfare against the United States and against US companies. She says these sanctions are just mafia-style intimidation techniques, and she vows to continue her work to remind states of their legal obligations to punish and stop genocide and hold those who benefit from it accountable. So why has the United States taken such a drastic move? Well, it has everything to do with a scathing report that Albanese has just published, and that was titled The Economy of Genocide. This is my interview with Francesca Albanese. Welcome to the Big Picture podcast. My name is Mohammed Hassan, and today we are joined by Francesca Albanese. She is the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. Francesca, welcome to the Big Picture.
Thank you for having me.
We are speaking just a few days after you published an explosive report that singles out more than 60 corporations that you accuse of sustaining and profiting off Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Some of these companies include Google, Amazon, Hyundai, Booking.com, and the bank Barclays. These are strong accusations, and they are leveled at companies that many of us interact with, use on a day-to-day basis. Why these companies, and why now?
Let me take a step back, because if this report were to be read as a list of incriminated companies, I would have failed. What my report tries to do is, and this is what I came to realize is the main problem which led me to write the report the way it's written, is to expose a system which has allowed the occupation to thrive over the decades instead of being dismantled as it should. So if the occupation, which has now turned genocidal against the Palestinian people, has not been dismantled, yes, it's because there is Israel's unrelinquished territorial ambition over what remains of Palestine. Yes, because there is an ideology that has infected many, including young people in Israel. Yes, because there is an Orientalist / racist component in some Western countries that see, as it was said recently, Israel doing the dirty job of all of us, which is, I mean, this deserves a discussion, but also on its own. But there is also the fact that many businesses are profiting from it. And so I exposed an economy of occupation made of companies sustaining the displacement and the replacement of the Palestinian, the displacement through the destruction of their livelihood and living space through weaponry and dual-use materials like bulldozers and other construction-related machinery that has been used to demolish homes, to uproot orchards, and then this machinery coupled with surveillance to create a system of segregations made of walls, checkpoints, and fences that have contained the Palestinians in a space where they could be controlled, meanwhile, and voila, the other pillar, the replacement pillar, could fester, which means that, for example, companies have built cities and villages for Israeli Jewish citizens only, the settlers, and this means homes, infrastructure, electric grid, water grid, power plants, roads, rails. And then there has been the extractivism using the quarries, the water, the other natural resources, including fossil fuel and oil offshore Gaza. And then there has been the industry of goods and service production, dates, Dead Sea products, wine, and other products that are sold into the market. And of course, there is also the tourism industry, so the supply chain. So you see, everything is intertwined. And these two pillars would have not been sustained themselves without a network of enablers, meaning banks, pension funds, other financial institutions, and universities and charities. Everything in this network has helped lend legitimacy, credibility, and funds to Israel to maintain this economy of occupation. And, I could have written this report 10 years ago. It would have already been valid. But today, not only we have a legal framework that makes any 100% clear, crystal clear, that any engagement with the occupation is unlawful because we have criminal proceedings for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity against either the state of Israel or Israeli officials. But also we have an ICJ advisory opinion which draws not the red line, really a highway, I say, that separates what you can do from what you cannot do. And engaging with an unlawful occupation, which the court has ordered to be dismantled totally and unconditionally because it violates the right of self-determination, it leads to annexation of occupied territory and permanent occupation, entails a number of other ancillary human rights violations and crimes, meaning pillages, encouraging forced displacement, sustaining extrajudicial killings, and this is what companies and the private sector are embroiled with. And this is the economy that has shifted from occupation to genocidal in the last 20 months. So this is what my report is about. And the companies that are listed there, are mentioned there, are just illustrative of how unlawful and dangerous, how intertwined into this criminal design the private sector is.
And you mentioned in the report that you have reached out to 45 of these companies and 15 of them responded. The 15 that responded, what did they say to the accusations that you leveled against them and their business practices?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't necessarily frame them as accusation. What I have done is that I've put on notice 48 entities, private entities. As I said, this also entails charities, so-called charities, or pension funds and universities. So 18 of them eventually, including after the submission of the report, have replied. The majority of them didn't engage. Those who have engaged have either denied the facts, because I brought to their knowledge facts that I gave them an opportunity to challenge or to correct, and then I also offered the legal analysis. Per each company, I wrote a different ad hoc legal analysis. And so to this, they responded either in denial or by saying that I was misinterpreting the law, or very few trying to engage bona fide, I mean, in good faith with me, a couple. But eventually, I would, because they really wanted me to take out their names from the report, which I would have been open to consider had I seen an opening, a written commitment that they would have disengaged. And this was not the case, and so eventually the report came public.
And so all of them, all 18, came back and said that, in a nutshell, no, we're not changing our business practices.
No, but it's interesting the way they function. It's interesting the way either they do not understand or they pretend not to want to understand, because they say, look, but we just provide this small component. I mean, we cannot be held responsible for the crimes that you say Israel is committing. But look, here's the thing. Companies are bound by due diligence, normally. In a situation of conflict, they have to observe a heightened due diligence. The situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is not just one of conflict, it's one where, and it's been documented for decades now, all the companies I've engaged with are companies that have been put on notice. Some of them are even in the UN database that the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights published and has updated over the years. So they know, they stay where they are with intent and knowledge, intent and purpose. And the argument that they do not contribute to violations because eventually they cannot be held responsible for what Israel does. Now it's untenable, because as of January 2024, there noticed that Israel might plausibly commit genocide. There are visible, evident, documented war crimes and crimes against humanity, and like starvation. So there is a lawful ecosystem where the due diligence would imply that they can use their leverage to correct the violation. For example, a company building roads and say, well, I'm not engaging with you if you keep on maintaining your infrastructure in the occupied Palestinian territory. And these would not spare them from scrutiny if their leverage was, proved useless or ineffective, which is the case. Not only they are not using their leverage, but it's not the context in which leverage from a private entity can work. Also, what the report exposes is that we need to stop using the fiction of the good Israel inside Israel proper and the bad Israel within the colonies. Because the colonies are not a standalone crime. They are a crime that serves Israel's interest, that serves to acquire land, acquire control over Palestinian natural resources, and while also repressing the Palestinians politically, economic, frustrating the right of self-determination. So it's the state which commits the crimes. The paradox is like today, imagine to be today 30 plus years ago in the face of apartheid South Africa. Shall we disengage from apartheid South Africa or no? Of course we should. Now we know we have to. And why? Not because of apartheid South Africa committing crimes inside, within the Bantustan, but for apartheid South Africa maintaining the Bantustan and an apartheid regime against the non-white. And the same thing is to be done today, all the more because apartheid Israel has gone as far as apartheid South Africa has never dared doing. Israel is committing a genocide, or plausibly a genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. This is the time to impose sanctions and cut ties with Israel. This is not a demand that comes from Palestinian civil society, international, global civil society, but many Israelis I've engaged with keep on asking why there are no sanctions. Because of political alliances, but also because I do think many people have not understood how deeply entrenched we all are with Israeli crimes. And not only Israeli crimes, because I think that today we see that there are many Western states and also some Arab states who are actively sustaining what Israel is doing. So, and if Palestine was a crime scene, today it would show the fingerprints of all of us. Palestine is a revealer that is showing us how intertwined we are. And because we are intertwined, we need to use our individual and collective power to change this. This is a defining moment in history as South Africa, the end of apartheid South Africa has been and what has led to that. And when it comes to the business sector, the standards we have come from two main historical developments. The end of apartheid South Africa, which led to the development of the guiding principles on business and human rights. And before then, the post-Holocaust and industrialist trials that led to scrutinize businesses and arms manufacturers for what they had done to the Jewish people and others during the Holocaust. Now Palestine is the next defining moment that needs to lead to accountability. If not now, when? And if not us pushing for this change, who?
I was thinking about the some of the companies that are listed here, and how many I personally have used over the last week.
And me.
I mean, even just preparing for this interview, I had to use Google. This interview itself, once it's finished, is going to be uploaded onto YouTube, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which owns Google. If these companies are complicit in this economy of genocide, does that mean the rest of us, by extension, are complicit in the genocide that is happening in Gaza?
I would reframe it. It means that all of us have the power to influence the system. And there are various ways. If we look at other movements, we need to learn from each other. If we look at other movements, my point of reference, because this is the only field in which I've been an activist, is environment. I think that it's very important to realize that we cannot change overnight 100% our life, and we cannot have one size fits all strategy for all sectors. So we need to start from where the low-hanging fruits are, individually and collectively. So as an individual, I need to check the goods I buy. It's easy. I mean, you can replace your coffee more easily than you replace the tools, the technological tools you use. And the tourist platforms you use. I mean, like millions of people around the world. I've used Airbnb and Booking.com. Alas, over the past 16 months, I've not done it. And now I'm going to close my Airbnb and Booking.com account. I don't want to be on the system anymore, at least as long as they stay engaged in advertising property that now it's in the West Bank and tomorrow can be in Gaza if the Israeli plan of taking over Gaza completely succeeds. this is the most modest contribution that many can do this summer. Don't support the unlawful occupation by a click. Don't support an economy that has become genocidal by a click. Can you do that? Can you, for 3 months, not use Airbnb and Booking.com? It's not a big sacrifice, is it? And again, these are ones. But then there are other actions that we can undertake. There are people who are shareholders in companies, or people who are workers in companies like in Microsoft and Google. There are workers themselves who have been the ones raising the alarm that the cloud system these companies were using was given to Israel to indiscriminately target hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And so I think that it's the shareholders before the users who need to be heard. Also, look, in the past weeks, I've been engaging with bankers and people in the financial sectors who are really appalled. It's not that all bankers are mean and evil. This moment gives us the possibility to put extra rules. It's not about killing the market, but make the market more human-friendly and absolutely genocide-free. So there won't be a possibility during an interview to go throughout all the actions that have to be taken. But this wouldn't even be my role, because, what I've done has also built on what investigative journalists, lawyers, the civil society movement, starting with the BDS, which has opened really people's eyes on this, and this is why it's so heavily attacked and criminalized, because the BDS is really a movement that is premised upon international law. This is what it carries for.
Boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
The boycott, divest, and sanction movement, which is something I've come to learn, because before I was almost intimidated from. Shall we act? Shall we look at the actions by the BDS? Because the campaign against the BDS was so heavy that I, as a special rapporteur in the beginning, I was nervous.
It's very aggressive, because the argument that gets pushed is that you are trying to isolate economically from the world the only Jewish state that exists. You are trying to take away their ability to function, their ability to engage with the economy, the market. You are punishing individual Israelis, culturally even. And I know that many of these arguments were also used against the movement to boycott apartheid South Africa. But this is a very prevalent argument in attacking BDS, and I'm sure that the same arguments will be used in attacking this report.
Look, BDS, now also because I live in an Arab country and in Africa, there are movements who are much more radical than the BDS. I think BDS is pretty soft. Now that I know the system they've tried to expose, it's pretty soft. And it's really peaceful, non-violent, an anti-discrimination kind of movement. It makes clear that is a place for a gathering of everyone, and as evidence of it, there are many Israelis who are part of it, many more Jewish people who are part of it from all over the world. So I won't enter into this other than saying, look, today everyone from the UN Secretary General to the Pope is accused of anti-Semitism, and it's so vile because anti-Semitism does exist. And what Israel is doing is creating a threat for Jewish people. No question about that. And this should never happen. The Jewish people, especially because of all the history that they come from, should feel safe and secure wherever they are. What I see BDS doing is also saying this is not against individual, it's against institutions. And this is why I'm telling you it's much, much less radical of other boycott or peaceful resistance movement, for example, in Tunisia, where I live, or in other African countries. But one thing that shows, for example, my own journey, I've always said, no, academic institutions should not be boycotted because this is the place where dialogue with whom, the places where individuals with whom dialogue must be built, the intellectuals, the intelligentsia. till the genocide. It was in February 2024. I do remember the moment I switched, when I saw not only universities saying nothing, Israeli universities saying nothing in the face of the destruction of Gaza universities, the killing of Gaza, Palestinian academics and students, and the entire faculty bodies being targeted, and an entire education system being pulverized. They were also attacking those who would express solidarity with those who were being targeted or killed or victimized or dehumanized. And even today, I do see many renowned scholars, including in my field, in the legal field, supporting Israel's violence, being against the Palestinians, against the Lebanese, or against Iranians. And this is it. Now you go, then I've been I've educating myself, I've become more familiar with the discourse also brought forward by Israeli scholars themselves who are anti-apartheid, like Maya Wind, who has exposed how the Israeli education system, the higher education system in Israel, is a pillar of the erasure of Palestinian cultural institution and self-determination, and how the Israeli universities themselves are part of the colonization through the ties they have with Israeli universities in the settlements, but also the military system feeds, which is the backbone of Israel as a state, as Anthony Lowenstein brilliantly exposes, but also is the backbone of Israeli universities. Those who come out of the army end up also developing partnerships with universities, and which then feeds into this myth of the startup nation. So it's all intertwined, and there is this osmotic exchange between the army and the universities, and the ideology behind Israel as a military state and as a settler colonial state, which is predicated upon the erasure of the Palestinians and that escapes scrutiny. So this is why I'm saying today it's absolutely necessary to understand that Israel as a state needs to face accountability. It's shocking, but I would also like to shed light on the painful awakening that these past months have been for many Israelis. Yesterday night, I was talking to an Israeli colleague who was saying, do people in the West understand how big society is becoming among young Israelis who do not want to return and fight in Gaza? And my question was, but why don't they disengage? And they say, because they don't want to be seen as traitors. Because being part of the IDF is this is the national identity. And this is why I say, of course, I don't justify the crimes that Israelis are committing, but I also say they partially, and I know that it might not fly well with many, especially the Palestinians, but my point of view as an external observer is that many young Israelis have been are victims themselves of a system that has indoctrinated them and has turned ideology into a political doctrine that has persuaded them that they were fighting against terrorists, and all the Palestinians in Gaza had either enabled or partaken or cherished cheered for the October 7 massacres. And now they see that is crumbling, and they cannot hold the responsibility for it collectively yet because they cannot challenge the IDF. So they are either depressed or they end up committing suicide. It's horrible what's happening to the Israeli society. However, in the face of this, it's dystopic to see the surveys circulated by newspapers like Haaretz, which speak of still 80% of the population or the respondents supporting the full destruction of Gaza or the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in what remains of Palestine. So what I say, in the face of this, we need to take action all together, and from all paths and rails against the state of Israel, because right now it represents a threat against the Palestinians, against the Israelis themselves, a threat for the region and for all of us. Because look, if you look at the stock exchange of Tel Aviv, which has been rising and amassing around $220 billion since the beginning of the genocide, and $70 billion in the last month alone. This is where the problem is. It's not the Israelis are getting rich out of the genocide. Is that there are corporations and there is an oligarchy connected to the defense industry, including in Europe and in the US, getting rich out of the genocide. And the Israelis are also trapped in this system. So those who do not have anything to gain from this alliance and the profits of the arms manufacturers and the surveillance, the spying industry, they need to get together, unite, and oppose it.
So I want to look at a particular example. You mentioned educational institutions, and a university that we have been in contact with recently is Oxford University, because they have been accused of using part of their endowment to invest in a fund that is overseen by BlackRock, which is one of the major companies that is listed in your report. They oversee about $10 trillion worth of assets. It's actually dizzying to think about. But the particular fund that Oxford University is investing in, the accusation is that 36 companies on that list are listed on the UN database that you mentioned, which means that they are complicit or connected to illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, when we put that to Oxford University, they came back and they said that this is, for them, a passive investment, and that, I'm going to quote here, passive investments are used commonly across the investment industry by many institutions, pension funds, and other pools of capital. It is estimated that 50% of the investment industry is invested passively. What do you say to that argument? What do you say to Oxford University when they say, hey, listen, we have this money, we're investing it passively, and we have checks and balances that we try and assure that it's not going to a bad place, but this is the way the world works.
Okay, so passively divest now. Because I'm telling you that here it's not even about proving your complicity. By the very fact that you stay engaged in companies and sector and in an ecosystem that is punctuated by crimes, international crimes after international crimes, enmeshes you into liability. And this is an Oxford, frankly, I've received information about the Oxford University endowment, and it is on my own database, because I've collected a database of 1,000 companies. And it's just this is what I'm going to discuss with the university next, because I do see areas of concern, and the reasons that the university is given sounds, very respectfully preposterous. And they are hiding behind a finger, but the university, which again is the cradle of the shaping of present and future generations, cannot afford such a level of hypocrisy. And this applies to an entire sector of knowledge production, and this is true across universities in the West primarily. There is a link. Look, there is a link between how fierce universities have been in repressing student-led scrutiny, student movement, and encampment, and other, the scrutiny that has also come from faculty and other staff, administrative personnel, and their embroilment in the unlawful occupation.
Right,
and
because most of these
economy
student movements
occupation.
were specifically targeting the investments their own universities are making.
They've been brilliant. Look, one of the regrets I have is to have been unable to shed more light on the university complicity or the university being enmeshed in this system, because again there are many universities who would go bankrupt if they had to lose the funding and come from the European Horizon program or from the defense industry in their own country or connected to Israel in particular. So this show us where we are today. Universities that do not just form and shape young minds to fit the market, but a very specific market which is connected to the defense industry. And when young people complain based on values and principles and international law, they are chastised. This is the picture of our time. So instead of universities need to change their behavior. Students need to feel encouraged that they are standing for the right thing, and they need to keep on doing that peacefully and non-violently as they have done, because every mistake, every loss of control will be used against them and against the civil society movement, against apartheid and genocide. But also this is upon time for civil society to turn their eye against or on the universities, as there is nothing neutral in engaging with an unlawful occupation which has upheld and led to the establishment of an apartheid regime and which is now turning genocidal.
The thing with a lot of these companies is that this is not the only accusation that is leveled against them, that they are complicit in human rights abuses in Palestine specifically. Many of these companies have also been accused of being complicit in Congo and in Sudan and in a number of other very grave human rights abuses around the world. There's a racial capitalism, and you say that there's a historic relationship between violent dispossession and private power. There is an argument that says this is capitalism. You're describing the way capitalism works in our modern society, and how do we begin to untangle ourselves from it without bringing the entire house down? And is this necessarily the right approach when trying to kind of address something that is as immediate as the genocide that is ongoing in Gaza?
Wow, what a question. Look, first of all, we need to understand that this is not new, and the private sector and companies have historically been the drivers or the enablers of colonial projects, settler colonial project. And there is huge, extensive literature about that, and now it's studied as racial colonial capitalism on its own, because capitalism has had a racialized component. This is also how private companies have escaped accountabilities historically. The limited responsibility, for example, is the legacy of a system where private actors have been able to be shapers of the law without being subjected to it. And this is the outcome of it is in front of our eyes today, where on the one hand you have multinationals who are more influential and hold greater capitals, greater wealth than sovereign states, therefore are more influential. But also they are right holders without corresponding duties and obligations, because then the obligations are only upon member states, while the private sector only has responsibilities
to their shareholders.
Yeah, so you see where it's going. We are in a phase where you have states that participate into multinational enterprises. It seems that the states control the enterprise, but very often and de facto is the other way around, is that the company, being them in the army industry or in often oil companies, are more influential than states themselves, like governments themselves, and us, electoral bodies, us citizens, including in the democracy, in the democratic system. So this is the scenario that also Palestine is revealing. Of course, there have been member states with whom I've engaged that have said, but so where do we draw the line without making the entire system, like a Jenga tower, collapse on our head? And I say, don't worry, wait a second, breathe, because I'm not saying that, again, it's like the zero waste movement that I was referring to. We are not going to be able to stop using plastic altogether. And also, it's not plastic as a whole that is a problem. You see this? This is okay. It's single-use plastic. It's this excessive consumption. It's this excessive production that is problematic. And this is why it's not, I go as far as saying, it's not capitalism per se that I'm questioning. It's unfettered capitalism. Capitalism and markets that know no rules, that are able to sustain themselves and keep citizens embroiled into criminal activities, even when the crimes are ostentatious, in the name of profits, hidden by the claim of neutrality. You see what I mean? Hence, I think that we need, for me, the country you brought into the equation, Congo, is a good one, because is an excellent one, because I say, look at Congo. Congo is the most resource-rich country in the world, and is just being devastated by private interests-led voluntarism. And we need to switch from profit to self-determination. And this is what Palestine marks so clearly. The ICJ advisory opinion has created a watershed opportunity, a watershed moment, not just for the Palestinians, but also for the Congolese people, because it says the right of self-determination comes first and foremost, and so companies engaging in a given economy in Congo need to make sure that the right of self-determination of the Congolese people, or Congolese peoples, because there are different nations and groups and ethnic groups living there, is not sacrificed. And this is why it might take years. But if we continue to build on a human rights discourse and a human rights narrative, this moment will help us move away from this abyss of lawlessness where we're just driven by profit. And I'm not telling hedge funds to close down the shop. I'm just saying, guys, is there only way for you to make money to be completely irresponsible up to the point not to see shattered lives and even kids turn into just killable beings? And Gaza is today a meat grinder. Can you see what's happening? Can you disengage from that? Or this is going to be the norm from now on? And I think that there are many in the private sector who are ready to take not just a leap of faith, to take that commitment and become more conscientious and ethically responsible. You think
there are enough people in the private sector that are willing to go against their shareholders and their peers and the system that enriches their companies in order to be able to take a stance like this?
Potentially, yes. Look, in the past 72 hours, I cannot tell you how many messages, how many emails and other notes I've received, including on my social media, of people from the private sector and the financial sector telling me, I didn't know. Thank you for that. And asking me, what can we do? And there is no magic wand. The first thing is knowledge. Knowledge is power. And today we realize that for 30 years the knowledge has been diverted. We have been intoxicated with the discussion of security and self-defense. It's not about it's about security, yes, and it's about safety, yes, but it cannot be granted through self-defense. It is to be granted through self-determination. And it's true for the Palestinians, it's true for the Israelis, but also for people in the UK. Let me give you an example. How do we feel, you as a British citizen and me as an Italian, seeing
Not a British citizen, but yes.
Okay, you at home. I mean, how do British citizens feel, or how I feel as an Italian, to see our governments investing 5% of their budget into weaponry and arming themselves while cutting on social expenditure, schools, education, the health system, which has already been plagued by very heavy privatization. And why would I care? What is it going to give me more rearming? Against whom? Against what? Because we do not build peace with weapons. We build peace with peace. And in the past 2 years, peace diplomacy has been completely ostracized and shattered. We need to hold these governments accountable because they are not responding to the interest of the citizens. They are turning citizens into passive, complicit into this economy of war, while suffering themselves the loss of resources. So this is why I say we are much more intertwined than we are given to think. And in the past 30 years, even look at the UK government, it's still, like many others, still keep on reciting the mantra of the two-state solution. Do you really have the nerve to say a word about the two-state solution when you have still to recognize Palestine as a state? And well, by the way, it's clear that the UK has some stake into what Israel has been doing. I was shocked to hear, and not just as a state, but also as British individuals. Look, I was shocked shocked probably is not the correct term, but I was shocked and not surprised at the same time to see Tony Blair, the picture of Tony Blair 20 years later, still connected to some very dubious, to say the least, activity in the Middle East. This man should have been held accountable for the role he played in the destruction of Iraq. And when I say that impunity festers impunity, here we are, with Tony Blair now embroiled through his institute in the planning of the reconstruction of Gaza. And if you look at the discussion that now is ongoing with the Boston Consulting Company that has been engaged since 2024 into rebuilding Gaza. In fact, what this plan is the displacement, replacement. So the old testament according to Israel for the Palestinians, displace them voluntarily. I mean, if you read that document, that report that has come out denouncing the work of the Boston Consulting Group, is that it talks over and over of voluntary Palestinians choosing to leave Gaza and not to return Gaza, and this might amount to 25% of the population of Gaza. There is nothing voluntary about that. They have been bombed to the point of total annihilation and destruction. So they have created a nightmare for the Palestinians, leaving them no choice. But all the more, the only people who can decide about the reconstruction of Gaza are the Palestinians, not the Israelis, not the US, not Tony Blair and any other else, either as a state or others. What member states like the US, Israel, and others who have been plotting to transform this genocide into a lucrative endeavor is that they need to pay reparations to the Palestinians. This is what they have to do. But you see, We are still part of a system that has waged war for profit, destroying life, creating more insecurity and instability, not just in the Middle East, but for all of us. Because out of that war of destruction that was launched against Iraq, the life of all of us has become more unsafe and insecure.
I want to read you a quote from your speech at the UN Human Rights Council last week when you presented this report. You said, "I once thought the problem was ignorance, a lack of understanding about the history of Palestine. Later, I saw the ideology at play, the deep political affinity many states and elites hold with the state of Israel." What did you mean by that?
I mentioned earlier, without quoting the current Chancellor of Germany, who in the context of an unlawful aggression by Israel to Iran said, well, Israel is doing the dirty job for all of us. This is appalling. The fact that a European leader can say that without any restraints paint a very grim picture of where we are today. First of all, who is us? Because certainly it's not me and the millions of Europeans who have taken the street to bring the violence and the crimes in the occupied Palestinian territory to an end. But also, what is the dirty job that Israel is doing for all of us? It leads me to think of what Israel has been saying over and over the past 20 months. We are fighting a war of civilization. Mm-hmm. We are protecting Western values. Against whom?
Against barbarism, to quote the Israeli Prime Minister.
Barbarism. I mean, if we go back to what Ronald Reagan was saying decades ago, barbarism was the expansion of the Soviet Union in the Middle East, and today is the Arabs, the Muslim people. So this is feeding into the Islamophobia that is not only harming Arab people and the Palestinians in the Middle East, in the Levant, in North Africa, but also it's creating such a huge divide within our society. It's widening the cracks in our societies between us on the basis of religion. It's building and enhancing a sentiment of widespread sentiment of Islamophobia, and then of course it reflects in a rise of anti-Semitism, because it portrays Israel as the defender of the Jewish people wherever they are, which is not the case. Israel does not represent the entire Jewish community, or the all Jewish communities around the world, and this comes from Jewish people themselves. So this is what I'm talking about. We're still pretty racist as Europeans. I wouldn't say, this is probably where I would use the term passive. Many Europeans might be passive by default, because they have been indoctrinated to see the other, today Muslim people or people coming from outside European Union, as a danger, as a threat to our security, to our social security, to our lifestyle, to our civilization, whatever it is. But this country also proves that this is so false. There is so much beauty and so much richness in diversity. But for that richness and for that potential to unleash, we need to be united as a human family. And this is what can push back on the racist doctrine that has been openly or subliminally fostered by some oligarchs in our systems, like putting all of us against each other. Mm-hmm. And we need to to react to that passivity or passiveness that has allowed our societies to become what they are.
Okay, so we are 21 months now into this genocide. I think it's 21 months, and a lot of people for the longest time, yourself at the foremost, have looked to international law and the structures that exist that on paper are supposed to protect vulnerable people, to protect all of us from specifically another genocide happening in our wake. And yet, time after time, these institutions, whether it's the UN court itself, whether it's the ICC, whether it's protest movements, have utterly failed at stopping what is happening. You, as an international human rights legal expert, a scholar, when you look at international law today, do you still believe in it? Do you still believe this is the tool that can protect people despite everything that we've seen?
I think that the problem is how people seem to look at international law as a magic wand. It is not. It's not magic wand, and it's not God. So it's not something you need to have faith in. International law has offered human rights which are to be used both as a shield or as a sword. And to give you an example of how the system has failed us more deeply and has hit us close to home, before even looking at the ICJ, ICC, and the occupied Palestinian territory. Look at the way workers' rights or gender rights or the safety from persecution for political reasons, for ideological reasons, have been eroded. And today in the UK, you have an 80-year-old person arrested by the police, while in Europe, an ICC wanted criminal is flying, is given the permission to fly with his airplane. So and at the same time, the UK is still providing weapons and is still trading with a state accused of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. There is a link in the lawlessness that is registered at the international level and the relaxation of the effectiveness of international norms at the international level and what is happening, the erosion of individual and collective rights at the domestic level. If we manage to link these dots that link the destruction of life in Palestine and the erosion of life and a rights-oriented life for all of us, we will understand what we are standing against. And in unity, we will find the strength to change and correct the system using the law as a tool. And we have standards, which is something that was not a given 100 years or even 50 years ago. We have the standards, we have enforcement mechanisms, which are clearly failing. And this is why we need to hold them to account, both publicly and regain a space into the political arena that pushes for a different agenda. And you have MPs or politicians and local councils who are trying to do the right thing against the will of the government, against the position of the government. So this is but also you need to activate strategic litigation in some cases. And despite of the results, strategic litigations lead to battles where you win even if you lose, like the F-35 case that Al-Haq and others have brought against the UK government. This is, the rationale given by the court, which has acted, in my opinion, in a very conservative way and not understanding the system, shows that more knowledge is to be offered. And I hope that my report serves that purpose, exposing and explaining the system so that even judges fully understand it. Because clearly the political debate, which has even prevented from talking about Palestine, has not given them the possibility to fully understand with that ruling what they are contributing to.
That's our report. As always, thank you for watching. I'm Mark Hage, and we'll see you soon, I hope.